The plate slipped from my fingers before I could catch it, shattering against the polished marble floor with a crash that seemed to echo through the entire restaurant. Fragments of white porcelain scattered like snowflakes across the black tiles, the expensive veal ossobuco spreading in a messy puddle. The dining room went silent for one excruciating moment, dozens of eyes turning to stare at the disaster, and at me. Cazzo, che giornata di merda, I muttered under my breath, the Italian curse my grandmother had taught me slipping out before I could stop myself. My cheeks burned as I knelt down, desperately trying to gather the broken pieces with trembling hands. Miss Parker, that's the third plate this week. Mr. Donati's voice boomed across the dining room of Bellissimo, the upscale Italian restaurant where I'd been working for the past 8 months. He stood with his arms crossed, his round face flushed with anger. The cost is coming out of your paycheck. Again. I'm sorry, Mr. Donati. It won't happen again, I promised, knowing full well it was a lie. My exhaustion made my fingers clumsy, my mind foggy. Working double shifts 6 days a week would do that to anyone. Clean it up, now, and be quick about it, he snapped, before turning to the other patrons with an apologetic smile. Please, continue enjoying your meals, everyone. My sincerest apologies for the disturbance. I bit my lip to keep from crying as I scurried to the supply closet for a broom and dustpan. At 26, I hadn't imagined this would be my life. Scraping by on tips, living in a shoebox apartment with a roommate I barely knew, drowning in student debt from a degree I never finished. After my mother's cancer diagnosis last year, I dropped out of nursing school to help with her medical bills. Now she was gone, and I was left with nothing but grief and debt. As I swept up the broken plate, I felt a strange shift in the atmosphere of the restaurant. The constant murmur of conversation dimmed, replaced by whispers and an unusual stillness. I looked up to see the maitre d' rushing to the entrance, his usually composed face now a mask of anxious deference. Mr. Moretti, what an honor to have you join us tonight, he gushed, bowing slightly. Your usual table is ready, of course. I froze at the name. Everyone in Chicago knew of the Moretti family, even if you pretended not to. They controlled half the city's businesses, some legitimate, most not. Rumors of their involvement in everything from protection rackets to worse circulated constantly, though nothing ever seemed to stick to them legally. I'd seen the name in newspapers, heard it whispered in corners of the restaurant, but I'd never seen any of them in person. Until now. He entered surrounded by 3 men in dark suits, their eyes constantly scanning the room. But it was him I couldn't look away from. Tall, with broad shoulders, perfectly fitted in what was clearly a custom suit. He moved with the confident grace of a predator. His dark hair was styled impeccably, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass. But it was his eyes that held me captive, dark as midnight, and just as fathomless. Alessio Moretti, the youngest son who had somehow risen to become the head of the family at just 32, after his father's mysterious retirement to Sicily. I realized I'd been staring only when those dark eyes suddenly locked with mine. His gaze flickered briefly to the mess at my feet, then back to my face with an intensity that made my skin prickle. I quickly looked down, focusing on sweeping the remaining shards into the dustpan, willing myself to become invisible. I managed to clean up the mess and retreat to the kitchen, where chaos reigned as the chef barked orders at his staff. The news of Moretti's arrival had everyone on edge. Sophia. Mr. Donati grabbed my arm as I disposed of the broken plate. Table 7 needs a server. Monica called in sick and we're short-staffed. My stomach dropped. Table 7? But I don't care if it's the Pope himself. You're the only one available. Don't screw this up. His fingers dug into my arm. One mistake with the Morettis and you're done. Understand? I nodded, my throat too dry to speak. As I straightened my black uniform dress and retied my apron with trembling fingers, I gave myself a silent pep talk. Just take their order, bring their food, don't make eye contact. Simple. Nothing was ever simple when it came to the Morettis, as I was about to discover. I approached table 7 with my professional smile firmly in place, notepad clutched like a shield. Alessio Moretti sat with his back to the wall, giving him a clear view of the entire restaurant. His 3 companions were positioned around the table, their eyes constantly moving, assessing. Good evening, gentlemen, I managed without my voice shaking. Welcome to Bellissimo. May I start you with some drinks? While the others ordered scotch and whiskey, Moretti simply watched me. I could feel his gaze like a physical touch, assessing, calculating. When I finally turned to him, I found myself trapped in those dark eyes. "And for you, sir?" I asked, proud that my voice remained steady. "You're new," he stated rather than asked, his voice a deep, smooth rumble with just a hint of an Italian accent. "I've been here 8 months, sir," I replied automatically. One corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Yet, I've never seen you before." "I usually work lunch shifts and weekdays, sir." I didn't add that I'd picked up extra shifts wherever I could to make rent. He studied me for another moment before saying, "Barolo, the 2010 Reserve." I nodded and turned to leave when his voice stopped me. "What's your name?" I hesitated, something instinctive warning me against sharing even that small piece of information. But refusing wasn't an option. Sophia Parker." "Italian?" he asked, his head tilting slightly. "My grandmother was from Florence." Something flickered in his eyes. Interest, perhaps. "Bring the wine yourself, Sophia Parker. Don't send anyone else." It wasn't a request. The night progressed in a blur of tension. Every time I approached their table, conversation would cease. Every time I leaned in to place a dish or refill a glass, I could feel Moretti's eyes following my movements. His companions treated me with disinterest bordering on disdain. But he watched me with an intensity that made me feel both seen and exposed. By the time I brought their desserts, my nerves were frayed. As I set down the tiramisu in front of one of the men, his hand brushed against mine in a way that couldn't be accidental. I jerked back instinctively, causing the dessert to slide precariously close to the edge. The man smirked, his eyes traveling up and down my body in a way that made me feel dirty. "Careful there, pretty girl," he said, his voice slick with suggestion. "We wouldn't want another accident, would we?" Before I could respond, Moretti's voice cut through the air, cold and sharp as ice. "That's enough, Vince." Just 2 words, spoken barely above a whisper, but Vince's smirk vanished instantly, replaced by something that looked remarkably like fear. "Sorry, boss. Just having a little fun. She's not here for your amusement." Moretti's eyes never left mine as he spoke, and there was something in them I couldn't quite interpret. Possession, perhaps, or simple irritation at his subordinate's behavior. I finished serving their desserts without further incident and retreated to the kitchen, my heart pounding. When I returned later with their check, the tension at the table was palpable. Vince avoided looking at me entirely, while the other 2 men seemed unnaturally focused on their coffee cups. Moretti signed the check without even glancing at the total, a sum that exceeded my monthly rent, and handed it back to me. His fingers brushed mine, the contact sending an unexpected jolt up my arm. "Thank you for your service tonight, Sophia Parker," he said, my name rolling off his tongue like he was tasting it. I nodded, unsure what to say, and turned to leave. "One moment." His voice stopped me in my tracks. "I believe you dropped this earlier." When I turned back, he was holding up a worn silver bracelet. My mother's bracelet, the one she'd given me before she died. My hand flew to my wrist, finding it bare. How had I not noticed it was missing? Thank you," I stammered, reaching for it. He held it just out of reach, examining the simple charm that hung from it. A small silver key. "This is important to you." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. It was my mother's. Something shifted in his expression, a softening so subtle I might have imagined it. He motioned for me to extend my wrist, and, when I did, fastened the bracelet himself. His fingers were warm against my skin, surprisingly gentle for a man rumored to be so dangerous. "Take better care of precious things, Sophia," he said quietly. "They have a way of disappearing when left unattended." The warning in his words was unmistakable, though I didn't understand what I was being warned against. I left work at midnight, exhausted but grateful for the generous tip Moretti had left. Enough to cover this month's portion of my mother's hospital bills. The night air was cool against my skin as I waited at the bus stop, the street eerily quiet for downtown Chicago. When a sleek black Bentley pulled up to the curb, I instinctively stepped back into the shadows of the bus shelter. The rear window rolled down, revealing Alessio Moretti's face, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Get in," he said, the door opening as if by magic. My heart hammered against my ribs. I take the bus, thank you." "It wasn't an offer, Sophia Parker." His voice remained calm, almost gentle, but there was steel beneath it. "The last bus left 15 minutes ago. Get in." He was right about the bus. I'd missed it while counting my tips. Still, every instinct screamed at me to run, to call a rideshare, to do anything but get into that car. As if reading my thoughts, he added, "I'm merely offering you a safe ride home. Nothing more." Perhaps it was exhaustion, or the genuine concern I thought I detected in his voice, or simply the knowledge that refusing Alessio Moretti twice in one night might be more dangerous than accepting his offer. Whatever the reason, I found myself sliding into the leather seat beside him, the door closing behind me with a soft, expensive click. The interior smelled of leather and his cologne, something woody and expensive that made my head swim. One of his men sat in front, separated from us by a privacy partition that rose silently at the press of a button. "Where do you live?" Moretti asked, his eyes never leaving my face. I hesitated before giving my address in a neighborhood that was decidedly not where someone like him would typically venture. If he was surprised, he didn't show it, simply relaying the information to his driver. As we pulled away from the curb, I clutched my purse on my lap, staring straight ahead. The silence stretched between us, thick with unasked questions. "You speak Italian," he finally said. It wasn't a question. I tensed, remembering my muttered curse when I'd broken the plate. Just a few phrases my grandmother taught me. "Cazzo c'è giornata di merda," he quoted perfectly, and my face burned, a rather colorful phrase for a grandmother to teach. I swallowed hard. She had a vivid vocabulary. His laugh was unexpected, deep and genuine, transforming his severe features into something almost approachable. "I like honesty, Sophia. It's refreshing in my world." The car glided through the night-empty streets, the city lights painting shadows across his face. I studied him carefully when I thought he wasn't looking. The perfect cut of his suit, the glint of a platinum watch at his wrist, the signet ring on his right hand bearing what looked like a family crest. "Why are you doing this?" I finally asked, unable to contain my curiosity. "Giving me a ride home?" His eyes met mine, dark and unfathomable. "Perhaps I wanted to finish our conversation without an audience." "We weren't having a conversation," I pointed out. "Weren't we?" His lips curved into something not quite a smile. "You told me a great deal tonight without speaking a word." A chill ran down my spine. "I don't know what you mean." "You're drowning, Sophia Parker," he said softly. "Working yourself to exhaustion, jumping at shadows, wearing grief like a second skin." I stiffened, shocked by his perception and the casual way he laid me bare. "You don't know me." "Not yet," he agreed, "but I'd like to." The car slowed as we approached my rundown apartment building, its peeling paint and broken security door a stark contrast to the luxury I was currently sitting in. I reached for the door handle, desperate to escape this man who saw too much. "Wait." Moretti's hand covered mine, warm and surprisingly gentle. From an inside pocket, he withdrew a business card, thick, cream-colored cardstock, with just a phone number embossed in black. "If you ever need anything at all, call this number." I stared at the card, not taking it. "Why would you help me?" "Let's call it curiosity," he said, his eyes never leaving mine as he tucked the card into my purse. "For now." The driver opened my door, standing protectively as I stepped out onto the cracked sidewalk. Before the door closed again, Moretti leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Buonanotte, cara mia," he said softly. "Until we meet again." As the Bentley disappeared into the night, I stood frozen, clutching my purse with its dangerous new addition. Something told me my life had just irreversibly changed, though I couldn't have known then just how right I was. In my tiny apartment, as I collapsed onto my bed, still in my uniform, I pulled out the business card. The paper was thick between my fingers, the numbers seeming to pulse with possibilities and dangers I couldn't begin to understand. I should throw it away, forget this night ever happened. Instead, I tucked it into the small jewelry box that held my mother's few remaining possessions, telling myself I was merely keeping it as a curiosity, nothing more. But as sleep finally claimed me, Alessio Moretti's dark eyes followed me into my dreams, promising things I didn't dare name even to myself. The next morning dawned with a relentless headache and the lingering sensation of being watched. I'd barely slept, my dreams haunted by dark eyes and whispered Italian. As I shuffled to my tiny kitchenette to make coffee, my roommate Zoe was already there, her hospital scrubs wrinkled from her overnight shift. "You look like hell," she announced, passing me a chipped mug of coffee. "Late night?" I accepted the caffeine gratefully, avoiding her curious gaze. "Just the usual. Double shift." She studied me over the rim of her own mug. "You sure that's all? Because Mrs. Herschel in 3B said she saw you getting out of a fancy black car last night. Said the man inside looked like he belonged in a movie." My stomach twisted. The last thing I needed was neighborhood gossip. "Just a customer from the restaurant. He offered me a ride when I missed the bus." Zoe's eyebrows shot up. "A customer? In a car worth more than this entire building? Sophia, what aren't you telling me?" "Nothing," I insisted, the lie bitter on my tongue. "It was just a ride." She looked unconvinced but mercifully dropped the subject when her phone chimed. "Gotta run. Extra shift. Bills won't pay themselves." She squeezed my shoulder as she passed. "Be careful, okay? Men who drive cars like that usually want something in return." After she left, I stood motionless in our silent apartment, my coffee cooling, forgotten in my hands. Zoe's warning echoed what I already knew. Men like Alessio Moretti didn't do anything without purpose. What did he want from me? The question followed me into the shower, through getting dressed, and onto the bus that would take me to my morning shift at Carmela's Cafe, my second job. The small Italian cafe was quieter than Bellissimo, frequented by students from the nearby community college and locals looking for authentic espresso. The owner, Carmela, was a 60-something widow who'd taken a liking to me when I'd correctly pronounced all the Italian pastry names during my interview. She reminded me of my grandmother, fierce, loving, and perpetually worried that I wasn't eating enough. "Sophia, you're early," she called as I entered through the back door. Her sharp eyes immediately narrowed. "And you look terrible. Sit. I'll make you something to eat." "I'm fine, Carmela, really." "Nonsense. You're pale as my pizza dough." She ushered me onto a stool at the small prep table and bustled around the kitchen. "That fancy restaurant is working you too hard. You should quit. Work here full-time." I smiled tiredly. "You know I can't afford that. Bellissimo pays better." She muttered something in Italian that sounded distinctly unflattering toward my other employer as she placed a plate of frittata in front of me. "Eat. Then we talk." The routine of the cafe gradually eased my tension. I lost myself in the rhythm of pulling espresso shots, steaming milk, arranging pastries, and chatting with the regulars. Here, in this warm space smelling of coffee and baked goods, last night felt like a strange dream. Until the bell over the door chimed at precisely 10:47 a.m. I didn't need to look up to know who had entered. The cafe went quiet, conversation stuttering to a halt as Alessio Moretti stepped inside, followed by a single bodyguard who positioned himself near the door. Unlike last night's formal attire, today Moretti wore a charcoal gray cashmere sweater over dark jeans, the casual clothes somehow making him look even more dangerously attractive. My hands froze on the espresso machine. How had he found me here? I hadn't told him about my second job. His eyes found mine immediately, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth as he approached the counter. The other customers gave him a wide berth, conversations resuming in hushed tones. "Good morning, Sophia," he said, my name still rolling off his tongue like a caress. "Mr. Moretti," I managed, wiping my suddenly damp palms on my apron. "What can I get for you?" "Alessio," he corrected, resting one hand casually on the counter. The signet ring gleamed under the cafe lights. "I think we're past formalities, don't you?" Before I could respond, Carmela emerged from the kitchen, stopping short when she saw who was at my counter. Recognition, followed by wariness, flashed across her face. "Mr. Moretti," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "An honor to have you visit my humble cafe." He turned to her with a respectful nod. "Mrs. Ricci, it's been too long. My father always spoke highly of your late husband. And your cannoli." A complex emotion crossed Carmela's face. Something like grief, mixed with caution. "Antonio was fond of your father as well. Before everything, whatever everything, was hung in the air between them, laden with history I didn't understand." Moretti merely inclined his head again before turning back to me. "A double espresso, per favore," he said, "and whatever pastry Sophia recommends." Carmela gave me a sharp look before retreating to the kitchen, leaving me alone with him. I busied myself with the espresso machine, grateful for something to do with my trembling hands. "The almond croissants are good," I offered, not looking at him. "Carmela makes them herself." "Then an almond croissant it is." He watched me work, his gaze so intense I could feel it like a physical touch. "You're surprised to see me." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "I didn't tell you I worked here. You didn't have to." He accepted the espresso I slid across the counter, his fingers brushing mine deliberately. "I make it my business to know things, Sophia." The implication sent a chill down my spine. Had he been having me followed, looking into my life? I placed an almond croissant on a plate with more force than necessary, powdered sugar dusting the counter. "Why?" I demanded, keeping my voice low. "Why would you care where I work or what I do?" His eyes held mine, dark and unreadable. "You intrigue me." "I'm a waitress," I said flatly. "There's nothing intriguing about me." "I disagree." He took a sip of his espresso, nodding appreciatively. "A half-Italian waitress who works 2 jobs, speaks her grandmother's language, and wears grief and exhaustion like armor, yet still carries herself with quiet dignity. I find that very intriguing indeed." My face heated at his assessment. "I'm just trying to survive." "Aren't we all?" Something flashed in his eyes, a vulnerability so brief I might have imagined it. Then his mask of cool control returned. "I have a proposition for you." Alarm bells rang in my head. "I'm not interested in—" "It's not what you're thinking," he interrupted, amusement flickering across his face, "though your assumption is illuminating." I flushed deeper, mortified. "My mother is hosting a charity gala this Saturday," he continued. "I find these events tedious, but appearance is required. I'd like you to accompany me." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "You want me to go to a charity gala with you?" "Is that so difficult to believe?" "Yes," I said honestly. "You could have anyone. Models, socialites, women who actually own evening gowns and know which fork to use." His lips quirked. "Perhaps that's precisely why I don't want them." A customer cleared their throat behind him, waiting to order. I welcomed the interruption, needing space to think. Moretti stepped aside, taking his espresso to a small table in the corner. He sat with his back to the wall, sipping his coffee and watching me as I served other customers, his bodyguard standing impassively nearby. When the morning rush subsided, he approached the counter again, setting down his empty cup. "You haven't given me an answer." I wiped my hands on my apron, buying time. "I don't have anything to wear to something like that." "That can be arranged. I'm working Saturday night at Bellissimo." "No, you're not. I've already spoken to Donati. You have the evening off." My head snapped up. "You spoke to my boss? Without asking me first?" A flash of annoyance crossed his face. "I anticipated your practical objections." "That's not your decision to make," I said, anger overriding my fear. "You can't just rearrange my life because you've decided I'm intriguing." For a moment, his expression darkened, and I remembered exactly who I was talking to. A man whose family name made people tremble, whose business dealings were whispered about but never openly discussed. I'd crossed a line, speaking to him this way. To my surprise, the darkness passed, replaced by something that looked almost like respect. "You're right," he said, the admission clearly costing him. "It was presumptuous of me. I apologize." The words sounded foreign on his tongue, as if he rarely had cause to use them. I blinked, thrown off balance by his concession. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small white card, different from the one he'd given me last night. "My mother's charity supports medical research for rare childhood cancers. The gala raises funds for families struggling with medical bills." He placed the card on the counter between us. "Perhaps that might interest you, given your own recent experiences." My breath caught. How did he know about my mother, about the medical bills that had consumed my life savings and then some? "The invitation stands," he continued, his voice gentler than I'd heard it before. "A car will come for you at 7 on Saturday if you decide to accept. If not..." He shrugged one shoulder elegantly. "I'll understand." He turned to leave, his bodyguard immediately moving to open the door. At the threshold, he paused, looking back at me. "For what it's worth, Sophia, I think you'd bring more genuine compassion to that ballroom than all the socialites and their designer gowns combined." The bell chimed as the door closed behind him, leaving me clutching the invitation card with shaking hands. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock embossed with gold lettering. The Moretti Foundation Annual Charity Gala, supporting families fighting childhood cancer. Carmela emerged from the kitchen as soon as he was gone, her face tight with concern. "Sophia, mia cara, what have you gotten yourself into?" "Nothing," I insisted, still staring at the invitation. "He's just a customer." She made a sound of disbelief. "Alessio Moretti is not just anything. I've known that family for 40 years. They don't take interest in people without reason." "What did you mean before?" I asked, seizing the opportunity. "About his father and everything?" Carmela sighed, suddenly looking every one of her 60-odd years. Old history. Chicago was different then. Territories, families, loyalties. She waved a hand dismissively. "What matters is the present. And in the present, you need to be careful. The Morettis. They live in a different world. A dangerous one." "I know who they are," I said quietly. "What they're rumored to do. Then you understand why I worry." She patted my cheek affectionately. "Beautiful girls like you don't enter their world without paying a price." I tucked the invitation into my apron pocket, trying to ignore the way it seemed to burn against my hip for the rest of my shift. By closing time, I'd convinced myself I couldn't go. Entering Alessio Moretti's world, even for one night, was a risk I couldn't afford. But as I unlocked the door to my apartment that evening, I found a large white box waiting on my doorstep, tied with a simple black ribbon. No card, no note. There didn't need to be. Only one person would have sent it. With trembling fingers, I carried it inside and placed it on my bed. The ribbon slid away like silk, and when I lifted the lid, I gasped. Nestled in tissue paper lay the most beautiful dress I'd ever seen. Deep emerald green, with a fitted bodice and flowing skirt that would fall just below my knees. It was elegant without being ostentatious, expensive without screaming its price tag. More disturbing was that it would fit me perfectly. Alongside it was a pair of black heels, sized exactly right for my feet, and a small velvet jewelry box containing simple diamond drop earrings. My phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. "The green will complement your eyes. A." I sat heavily on the edge of my bed, staring at the dress and the text message. How had he gotten my number? The same way he'd known where I lived, where I worked, what size I wore. He had resources, connections, power, and for some unfathomable reason, he'd turned that power toward me. I should return the dress, send a polite but firm refusal. Keep my distance from a man whose world would swallow mine whole without a trace. That would be the sensible choice, the safe choice. Instead, I found myself replying, "How did you know my size?" His response came immediately. "I pay attention to details, Kara." "Does this mean you'll come?" I stared at my phone, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. One word would commit me to stepping into his world, if only for a night. One word would change everything, yes. The moment I sent it, a strange sense of inevitability washed over me, like I'd been moving toward this decision from the instant his dark eyes had first met mine across the restaurant. Saturday arrived with unseasonable warmth for late September in Chicago. I spent the day in a state of nervous anticipation, alternating between certainty that I should cancel and strange excitement for the evening ahead. Zoe had left for her shift at the hospital with a knowing smile and a whispered, "Be safe," leaving me alone with my thoughts and the emerald dress that hung on my closet door like a challenge. At precisely 6:55, my phone chimed with a text. "Your car is waiting. A." I took one final look in the mirror. The dress fit as if it had been made for me. the color making my hazel eyes look more green than brown. I'd swept my dark hair up into a simple chignon, applied minimal makeup, and added the diamond earrings, the only truly valuable things I now owned. My mother's bracelet gleamed at my wrist, the small silver key catching the light. Just one night, I whispered to my reflection, then back to reality. But as I stepped outside to find the same black Bentley waiting at the curb, its driver holding the door open with respectful deference, I couldn't shake the feeling that reality as I knew it was already slipping away, replaced by something far more dangerous and alluring. The car glided through Chicago's evening traffic, carrying me toward the glittering lakefront where the city's elite gathered in their mansions and penthouses. We eventually turned through ornate gates, following a curved driveway toward a sprawling estate that looked more like it belonged in the Italian countryside than on Lake Michigan's shore. "Whose home is this?" I asked the driver, finding my voice at last. "The Moretti family residence, miss," he replied. "Mr. Alessio grew up here." The car stopped at the foot of marble steps leading to massive wooden doors thrown open to reveal warm light and the distant sounds of an orchestra. As the driver opened my door, a familiar figure appeared at the top of the steps. Alessio Moretti stood waiting for me, devastatingly handsome in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. As our eyes met, something passed between us, a current of recognition, of inevitability. And though every instinct warned me to run back to the safety of my small life, I found myself climbing the steps toward him instead, drawn by a force I couldn't name and wasn't sure I wanted to resist. Alessio's eyes darkened as I approached, his gaze traveling from my face to the emerald dress and back again. "You are stunning, Sophia," he said, his voice low enough for only me to hear. "Thank you," I replied, suddenly aware of how out of place I was. "For the dress, too. It's beautiful." "The dress is merely fabric," he said, offering his arm. "You're what makes it beautiful." I placed my hand on his arm, feeling the solid strength beneath the expensive suit. As we entered the mansion, I fought to keep my expression neutral. But it was difficult not to gape. The foyer alone was larger than my entire apartment, with soaring ceilings, marble floors, and a grand staircase that curved elegantly upward, paintings that looked like they belonged in museums hung on the walls, and fresh flowers spilled from crystal vases taller than I was. "Try not to look so impressed," Alessio murmured, amusement coloring his voice. "Most of these people mistake awe for weakness." I squared my shoulders, lifting my chin slightly. "Is that why you brought me? To impress them with how easily awed I am?" Something flashed in his eyes, surprise, followed by that same respect I'd glimpsed in the cafe. "I brought you because I wanted you here," he said simply. "The rest doesn't matter." But it did matter, as became immediately clear when we entered the main ballroom. Conversation stuttered to a halt as heads turned in our direction. Women in designer gowns and men in custom tuxedos stared openly, their expressions ranging from curiosity to blatant disapproval. "Alessio, darling," a woman's voice called, and the crowd parted to reveal an elegant woman in her 60s, her silver-streaked dark hair swept into an immaculate updo. Despite her age, she moved with the grace of someone half her years, her black gown whispering against the marble floor as she approached. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't come." "Mother," Alessio greeted her, bending to kiss her cheek. "You know I wouldn't miss your gala." Her sharp eyes, the same midnight color as her son's, turned to me with undisguised interest. "And who is your lovely guest?" "Sophia Parker," Alessio said, his hand coming to rest at the small of my back. "Sophia, my mother, Elena Moretti." I extended my hand, hoping she couldn't see it trembling. "It's an honor to meet you, Mrs. Moretti. Your home is beautiful." She took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Italian?" she asked, though I was certain she already knew the answer. "My grandmother was from Florence," I replied, the same answer I'd given her son. A smile that didn't quite reach her eyes curved her lips. How delightful. "Alessio, do introduce Sophia around." "I must check on the auction items." She patted his cheek in a gesture both affectionate and proprietary before gliding away, leaving a cloud of expensive perfume in her wake. "She doesn't approve of me," I murmured, as Alessio guided me deeper into the room. "She doesn't know you," he corrected. "My mother reserves judgment until she has all the facts." "And what facts are those?" His hand pressed more firmly against my back. that you're not like the women I usually bring to these events." Before I could ask what he meant, we were approached by a group of men in tuxedos, their expressions a careful blend of deference and caution as they greeted Alessio. I stood silently as they discussed business matters in vague terms: property acquisitions, import challenges, staffing issues at establishments with Italian names. One of them was Vince, the man who had made me uncomfortable at the restaurant. His eyes slid to me repeatedly, his gaze assessing and cold. "Miss Parker," he said during a lull in the conversation, "that's quite a dress. I barely recognized you without your waitress uniform." Heat rushed to my face, but before I could respond, Alessio's arm slid around my waist. "Sophia is my guest tonight, Vince," he said, his tone pleasant, but with an undercurrent of warning. "I trust you'll remember that." Vince's smile froze. "Of course, boss. Just making conversation." "Find someone else to converse with," Alessio suggested, his voice still light despite the unmistakable command. The group dispersed quickly after that, leaving us momentarily alone in the crowded room. I stepped away from his hold, needing space to breathe. "You didn't have to do that. I can handle myself." "I know you can," he said, surprising me. "But tonight, you're under my protection. That means something in my world." "And what exactly is your world, Alessio?" I asked, emboldened by the champagne I'd sipped and the frustration of being treated like a possession. "Everyone here looks at you like you're either royalty or a predator they're afraid to turn their backs on." His expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. "Perhaps I'm both." Before I could press further, the orchestra began playing a waltz, and couples moved to the center of the ballroom. Alessio extended his hand. "Dance with me." It wasn't a request, but neither was it quite a command. Something in between, an expectation that assumed compliance, but offered the illusion of choice. I hesitated only briefly before placing my hand in his. He led me onto the dance floor with confident grace, one hand at my waist, the other clasping mine. I was grateful for the dance lessons my mother had insisted on when I was younger, though I'd never danced with a partner who moved with such practiced ease. "You surprise me, Sophia," he said, as we turned smoothly among the other couples. "Most women would be asking about my cars, my properties, my businesses by now." "I'm not most women," I replied, "and I'm more interested in why you brought me here than in what you own." A genuine smile curved his lips, transforming his severe features. "Direct. I appreciate that." He pulled me fractionally closer as we turned again. "I told you. You intrigued me." "That's not an answer." His eyes held mine, searching. "When you've had everything handed to you your entire life, Sophia, you develop a sensitivity to authenticity. The women I usually meet want something: status, money, the thrill of danger. You..." He paused, considering. "You look at me like you're trying to solve a puzzle, not secure an advantage." "Maybe I'm just better at hiding my motives," I suggested. He laughed then, the sound rich and unexpected. "No, cara mia, you're many things, but duplicitous isn't one of them. Your face reveals everything you feel." As if to prove his point, his hand at my waist slid slightly lower, and I felt heat rush to my cheeks. His smile deepened, satisfied. The music ended, and he led me from the dance floor toward a set of French doors that opened onto a terrace overlooking manicured gardens. The night air was cool against my flushed skin, the distant sound of Lake Michigan a soothing counterpoint to the orchestra inside. "Better?" he asked, watching me closely. I nodded, grateful for the momentary escape. "It's a bit overwhelming." "The wealth?" he asked. "Or me?" "Both," I admitted honestly. "I don't belong in this world, Alessio." "Perhaps this world doesn't deserve you," he countered, moving to stand beside me at the stone balustrade. "These people, with their old money and older secrets, they play at charity while protecting their fortunes. At least I'm honest about who I am." "Are you?" I turned to face him, because I still don't know. Everyone whispers about your family, but no one says anything directly. His expression hardened slightly. "What do they whisper, Sophia?" I hesitated, suddenly aware of how isolated we were on the terrace, that your family controls half of Chicago's businesses, that people who cross you disappear, that your father didn't really retire to Sicily. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. There and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. And do these whispers frighten you?" "They should," I said softly. "But I'm still here." He studied me for a long moment, his gaze so intense I had to resist the urge to look away. "My father was weak," he finally said, his voice low. "He let sentimentality cloud his judgment, allowed rivals to encroach on what belonged to our family. I did what was necessary to preserve our legacy." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the night air. He hadn't denied anything. In fact, he'd all but confirmed the darkest rumors. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. He reached out, his fingertips brushing a loose strand of hair from my face with surprising gentleness. "Because you asked, and because I find I don't want to lie to you, Sophia." The intimacy of the gesture, coupled with his words, left me momentarily speechless. I was saved from having to respond by the arrival of another guest on the terrace, a tall, striking woman in a red gown that clung to her model-thin figure. "Alessio," she purred, her accent distinctly European. "I've been looking everywhere for you." His hand dropped from my face, his expression cooling instantly. "Francesca, I wasn't aware you were in Chicago. Your mother invited me." Her heavily lidded eyes flicked dismissively over me before returning to Alessio. "She thought you might appreciate some familiar company." The implication hung in the air between them. Clearly, they had history. The woman was stunning, with the kind of polished beauty that came from expensive care and genetic good fortune. Next to her, I felt painfully ordinary in my borrowed finery. "I have company," Alessio said flatly, his hand finding the small of my back again. "Sophia, this is Francesca Ricci, an old acquaintance. Francesca, Sophia Parker." Francesca's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose fractionally. "Parker? Not Italian, then." "My father was American," I said, oddly defensive. "My mother's family was from Florence." "How quaint." Her smile was sharp as a knife. "And what is it you do, Sophia Parker?" Before I could answer, Alessio cut in. "Sophia works in hospitality. She's remarkably accomplished." Francesca's laugh was like glass breaking. "Beautiful, but dangerous. Hospitality? Alessio, your mother will have a fit." "My mother's opinions are her own," he said coldly. "As are mine." She stepped closer, placing a manicured hand on his arm. "Don't be difficult, Tesoro. You know how these little diversions of yours always end. Why put the poor girl through it?" I felt my face burn with humiliation. Was that what I was? A diversion? A brief entertainment before he returned to women like Francesca? "That's enough," Alessio said, his voice dropping to a register that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "You're being rude to my guest, Francesca." She withdrew her hand as if burned, something like fear flashing across her perfect features. "My apologies. I simply misunderstood the nature of your relationship." Her smile was brittle as she turned to me. "Enjoy your evening, Sophia Parker, however long it lasts." She swept back into the ballroom, leaving a chill in her wake. I stepped away from Alessio's touch, suddenly needing distance. "Is she right?" I asked, hating the vulnerability in my voice. "Am I just a diversion? Something different to amuse you until you get bored?" His jaw tightened. "Francesca is bitter. We were engaged once briefly. It ended badly." "That doesn't answer my question." He moved toward me, and though everything in me wanted to retreat, I held my ground. "I don't know what this is yet, Sophia," he said, his voice softer than I'd heard it before. But it's not a diversion. The sincerity in his eyes was disarming. I wanted to believe him, even as every rational part of me screamed that this was dangerous. He was dangerous. A man like him didn't enter the life of a woman like me without devastating consequences. Before I could respond, a discreet cough interrupted us. One of Alessio's men stood at the terrace doors. "Excuse me, sir. There's a situation that requires your attention." Alessio's expression darkened. "Now? I'm afraid so, sir. Your mother suggested the study." He sighed, clearly annoyed at the interruption. "Tell her I'll be there momentarily." When the man had gone, he turned back to me. "I need to deal with this. Will you be all right on your own for a few minutes?" Part of me was relieved for the reprieve, a chance to gather my scattered thoughts away from his overwhelming presence. I'll be fine. Go handle your situation. He hesitated, then reached for my hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture that seemed both archaic and intimate. Don't disappear on me, Kara, he murmured against my skin, sending a shiver up my arm. I'm not finished with you yet. The words could have sounded threatening, but the warmth in his eyes transformed them into something closer to a promise. Then he was gone, striding through the ballroom with purpose, people instinctively moving from his path. I remained on the terrace for several minutes, trying to calm my racing heart and sort through the confusing jumble of emotions Alessio Moretti evoked in me. Fear, fascination, a dangerous attraction I couldn't afford to indulge. When the night air became too cool, I reluctantly returned to the ballroom, where the gala was in full swing. I made my way to the bar, ordered a glass of water, and tried to blend into the background. An impossible task given the curious glances and whispered comments that followed me. Clearly, my appearance with Alessio had caused quite the stir. "You're making quite an impression," a voice said beside me, and I turned to find Elena Moretti, a champagne flute balanced delicately between her fingers, though perhaps not the one you intended. I straightened my spine. "I didn't come here to make an impression, Mrs. Moretti." "No?" Her smile was cool but not unkind. "Then why did you come, Sophia Parker?" The direct question caught me off guard. "Your son invited me," I said, opting for simple truth. "My son invites many women to many events," she replied, her gaze assessing. "Most of them arrive with an agenda." "I don't have an agenda," I said firmly. "I came because—" I hesitated, unsure how to articulate my reasons when I barely understood them myself. "Because you're curious about him," she finished for me, "about his world, about the power he wields so effortlessly." She sipped her champagne. "It's a natural response. Alessio has that effect on women. Always has." "It's not about power," I insisted, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. There was something undeniably compelling about the way he commanded a room, the way people deferred to him without question. Elena's expression softened marginally. "Perhaps not entirely, but be careful, my dear. My son doesn't give his interest lightly, but neither does he give his heart. Men like him, men like his father, they take what they want and move on. It's their nature." Before I could respond to this maternal warning, a commotion near the entrance to the ballroom caught our attention. Raised voices, then a man stumbling backward as if pushed. Alessio appeared in the doorway, his expression thunderous, his hand gripping the arm of a younger man who looked vaguely familiar. "What on earth?" Elena murmured, setting down her champagne. "Excuse me." She moved swiftly toward the disturbance, the crowd parting for her as it had for her son. I remained where I was, watching as Alessio released the man with a slight shove, speaking words I couldn't hear, but whose tone was unmistakable. Cold fury, barely contained. The younger man straightened his jacket, his face flushed with either embarrassment or anger. He said something in return, his gaze suddenly shifting in my direction. Alessio followed his line of sight, our eyes meeting across the room. Something in his expression changed, hardened, and he gestured sharply to one of his men, who immediately began moving toward me. Alarm flared in my chest. What was happening? The bodyguard reached me before I could decide whether to stay or flee. "Miss Parker," he said respectfully, "Mr. Moretti asks that you join him. Now." I followed the bodyguard through the crowd, acutely aware of the eyes tracking our progress. Whatever confrontation had occurred seemed to have been temporarily diffused. Alessio now stood with his mother and the younger man in what appeared to be a tense but controlled conversation. As we approached, I could hear Elena speaking in rapid Italian, her elegant hands gesturing emphatically. The young man, perhaps in his early 30s, with the same dark coloring as the Morettis but lacking Alessio's commanding presence, was shaking his head, his expression sullen. "I've done nothing wrong," he was saying as we came within earshot. "You're overreacting as usual." "Marco," Alessio said, his voice deceptively calm, "this is neither the time nor the place." His eyes flicked to me as I stopped beside his bodyguard, and something in his expression shifted. "Sophia, come here." It wasn't quite an order, but neither was it a request. I moved to his side, hyper-aware of the curious onlookers pretending not to watch the family drama unfolding. "Sophia, my younger brother Marco," Alessio said, placing a hand at the small of my back in what was becoming a familiar gesture of both possession and protection. "Marco, Sophia Parker." Marco's eyes, the same midnight shade as his brother's and mother's, widened in recognition. "Parker? The waitress?" He gave a disbelieving laugh. "So the rumors are true. You're slumming it these days, brother." Elena made a sharp noise of disapproval. "Enough, Marco. You're embarrassing yourself and the family." "I'm embarrassing the family." Marco's voice rose slightly before he caught himself, leaning in to hiss, "While he parades his latest conquest at Mother's charity gala. A waitress, for God's sake." I stiffened, humiliation burning through me. "I should go," I murmured to Alessio, starting to pull away. His grip tightened, keeping me firmly at his side. "No," he said, his eyes never leaving his brother's face. "Marco is just leaving." "You can't dismiss me like one of your employees," Marco snapped. "This is Mother's event, not yours, and as such, I expect my sons to behave with dignity," Elena interjected smoothly. "Marco, we'll discuss this tomorrow. For now, I suggest you make your apologies to Miss Parker and take your leave." Marco's jaw worked as he visibly struggled with his temper. Finally, he gave a stiff nod. "My apologies, Miss Parker," he said, not sounding remotely sorry. "Family disagreements shouldn't involve outsiders." He turned to his mother, kissing her cheek. "I'll call you tomorrow." He pointedly ignored Alessio as he left, shouldering his way through the crowd with none of his brother's grace or authority. The moment he was gone, Elena turned to us, her expression carefully composed. "Well, that was unfortunate," she said, as if discussing a minor catering mishap rather than a public family confrontation. "Sophia, I must apologize for my younger son's behavior. Marco has always struggled with decorum." "It's fine," I said automatically, though it was anything but. I felt distinctly out of place, caught in the middle of a family power struggle I didn't understand. "It's not fine," Alessio said, his voice tight with controlled anger, "and we both know this wasn't about decorum." Elena sighed, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her gown. "Perhaps we could discuss this privately, after the gala?" "There's nothing to discuss," he replied. "I've made my position clear. Marco needs to accept it, or there will be consequences." Something unspoken passed between mother and son, an entire conversation conducted through subtle shifts in expression that left me feeling like I was watching a foreign film without subtitles. "Very well," Elena finally said. "But this isn't over, Alessio. The family expects unity, especially now." Her eyes darted briefly to me before she added, "We can't afford distractions." With that cryptic comment, she turned to greet an approaching couple, smoothly transitioning back into her role as gracious hostess. Alessio's hand remained at my back, his touch tense. "What was that about?" I asked quietly. "Why was he so upset to see me?" Alessio guided me toward a quieter corner of the ballroom. "Family business," he said dismissively. "Marco has always resented my position. He thinks he should have a greater role in the family's affairs. And my presence upset him because—" Alessio's jaw tightened. "Because he knows I value you, and he looks for any perceived weakness to exploit." The statement, that Alessio Moretti valued me, a waitress he'd known for all of 3 days, should have seemed absurd. Yet something in his eyes, in the protective way he'd positioned himself between me and his brother, made me believe him. "Come," he said, taking my hand. "I think we've provided enough entertainment for one evening." He led me through a side door and down a corridor lined with paintings that looked valuable enough to fund my entire education. We climbed a sweeping staircase, the sounds of the gala fading behind us until we reached a set of double doors. Alessio opened them, revealing a large study with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. "Your office?" I asked, taking in the massive desk, the leather chairs, the shelves lined with books that looked well-read rather than merely decorative. "One of them," he replied, closing the doors behind us. "I thought you might appreciate a moment away from the spectacle." I moved to the windows, gazing out at the moonlight reflecting on Lake Michigan. The view was breathtaking. the dark water stretching endlessly, the city lights twinkling in the distance. It was a view that spoke of wealth, of power, of a world so far removed from my own that it might as well be another planet. "Your brother really hates me," I said, still facing the window. "Or at least, he hates that I'm here with you." Alessio moved to stand beside me, his reflection in the glass solemn and unreadable. "Marco doesn't know you well enough to hate you. He hates what you represent. And what's that? Change." He turned to face me, his dark eyes searching mine. "I've been different since I met you. People have noticed." I laughed nervously. "We met 3 days ago. How different could you possibly be?" "You'd be surprised," he said softly. "I've been distracted, less focused. I've missed meetings, delegated decisions I would normally handle personally, all because I can't stop thinking about a waitress who cursed in Italian and looked at me without fear." My heart stuttered in my chest. "That sounds like a problem for someone in your position." "It is," he agreed, reaching up to brush a strand of hair from my face, his touch lingering on my cheek. "A very dangerous problem. I should have stepped back, maintained some distance between us. Instead, I found myself leaning slightly into his touch. "Why me?" I whispered. "You could have anyone. That's precisely the point, isn't it?" His thumb traced the line of my jaw, sending shivers down my spine. "I can have anyone. Women who want my money, my power, my name. But you?" His eyes darkened. "You look at me like you see beyond all that, like you see me." "I don't even know you," I protested weakly. "Don't you?" he challenged. "You see more than most, Sophia Parker. It's what makes you dangerous." Before I could respond, a sharp knock on the door interrupted us. Alessio dropped his hand from my face, his expression closing. "Enter!" he called, stepping back from me. The door opened to reveal one of his men, not the bodyguard who'd escorted me, but an older man with silver at his temples and hard eyes. "Apologies for the interruption, sir, but there's a situation that requires immediate attention. Downstairs." Alessio's jaw tightened. "Can it wait?" "I'm afraid not, sir. It concerns the matter we discussed earlier." The man's eyes flicked briefly to me, then back to Alessio with clear meaning. Alessio nodded once. "I'll be right there." When the man had closed the door again, he turned to me with obvious reluctance. "I need to handle this." "More family business?" I asked. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Something like that. Wait for me here. I won't be long." "I can return to the gala." "No," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "After Marco's display, I'd prefer you stay where I know you're safe." "Please," he added, the word sounding unfamiliar on his tongue. "Make yourself comfortable. There's a bar by the bookshelf if you'd like a drink." With that, he was gone, leaving me alone in the study of one of Chicago's most notorious men. I wandered to the bookshelves, running my fingers along leather-bound volumes of Italian poetry, history texts, and surprisingly classic literature. A well-worn copy of Dante's Inferno caught my eye, the same edition my grandmother had kept on her nightstand throughout my childhood. I pulled it from the shelf, leafing through the pages marked with annotations in a strong, masculine hand. The notes were in Italian, but I recognized enough words to realize they were thoughtful, scholarly observations. This was not the reading material I'd expected from a man rumored to rule Chicago's underworld. Replacing the book, I moved to his desk, knowing I should respect his privacy, but unable to resist the temptation to learn more about him. The surface was meticulously organized, files stacked neatly, a silver pen set positioned just so, a laptop closed and centered perfectly. The only personal item was a small framed photograph of a much younger Alessio with an older man who must have been his father. They shared the same commanding presence, the same penetrating gaze. A noise at the door made me step back guiltily, but it was only the house staff delivering a tray with a carafe of water and 2 crystal glasses. The woman placed it on a side table without a word, her eyes carefully averted from mine as she slipped out again. I poured myself a glass of water, trying to calm my racing thoughts. What was I doing here? Alone in Alessio Moretti's private study, waiting for him like what? A girlfriend? A possession? A diversion, as Francesca had so cruelly suggested? Minutes stretched into nearly half an hour. I had just decided to ignore Alessio's instructions and return to the gala when the door opened. But it wasn't Alessio who entered, it was Elena Moretti, regal and composed as ever. "Miss Parker," she said, closing the door behind her. "I thought I might find you here." I set down my water glass, suddenly nervous. "Mrs. Moretti, Alessio asked me to wait for him." "Yes, I'm aware." She moved further into the room, her gown whispering against the carpet. "My son is detained. He asked me to check on you." Something about her explanation felt off, but I had no grounds to question it. "That's very kind of you." She gestured to one of the leather chairs. "May I? There are some things I think we should discuss, woman to woman." I nodded, taking the seat opposite her. Up close, I could see the fine lines around her eyes, the only indication of her age in an otherwise perfectly preserved face. She folded her hands in her lap, studying me with the same intensity her son often displayed. "You're very beautiful," she said at last, "though I suspect you don't fully realize it. That's part of your appeal to Alessio, I think. He's surrounded by women who weaponize their beauty. You wear yours unconsciously." "Thank you," I said cautiously, unsure where this conversation was heading. She smiled slightly. "That wasn't entirely a compliment, my dear. Innocence can be as dangerous as calculation in our world." "Your world," I corrected gently. "Not mine. Yet here you are," she pointed out, "in my home, wearing a dress my son selected, waiting in his private study. Whether you acknowledge it or not, you've already stepped into our world." I couldn't argue with her logic, uncomfortable as it made me. "What did you want to discuss with me, Mrs. Moretti?" She studied me for a moment longer, before sighing softly. "My son is at a critical juncture in his life, Sophia. The family business is expanding. New territories, new alliances. It requires his complete focus, his unwavering commitment." "I'm not distracting him," I said defensively. Her laugh was gentle but dismissive. "My dear, you've done nothing but distract him since the moment you met. Alessio has built his reputation on control, on focus. Yet in the past 3 days, he's been late to meetings, delegated important decisions, spent hours personally investigating your background. The confirmation that he'd been looking into my life sent an uneasy chill down my spine. I didn't ask him to do any of that." "You didn't have to." She leaned forward slightly. "I don't doubt that you're a good person, Sophia. Your circumstances, your mother's illness, your sacrifice of your education to care for her, speak to your character. But good people get hurt in our world, sometimes simply because they're in the wrong place at the wrong time." My mouth went dry at the implied threat. "Are you warning me away from your son, Mrs. Moretti?" "I'm offering you an opportunity," she corrected smoothly. "Alessio tells me you left nursing school to cover your mother's medical bills, that you're still struggling with that debt, working 2 jobs just to keep your head above water." I stiffened. "I don't want your money." "Everyone wants money, my dear. Some are simply more honest about it than others." She reached into a small evening bag, withdrawing an envelope that she placed on the table between us. "Inside, you'll find a cashier's check for $50,000, enough to clear your debts and return to school. All I ask in return is that you end whatever this is with my son. Tonight." I stared at the envelope, shock and indignation warring within me. "You're buying me off?" "I'm offering you a way out," she said, her voice softening, "before you're in too deep to escape. Alessio can be overwhelming. When he wants something, he pursues it with single-minded determination. It can feel flattering, intoxicating even. But men like my son, like his father, they don't change, Sophia. Not even for women they believe they love." The implication that Alessio might come to love me was so absurd that I almost laughed. "We barely know each other. You're overreacting to what? A few days of attention?" Elena's expression remained serious. "My son doesn't give his attention lightly. When he focuses on someone this way, it's consuming, for him, and eventually, for them. I've watched it happen before." A shadow passed over her face. "I've lived it myself." Something in her voice, a thread of old pain, carefully contained but still present, gave me pause. "You're talking about your husband." She nodded once. "Antonio was much like Alessio is now, powerful, charismatic, dangerous. I was younger than you when we met. He swept me off my feet, promised me the world." Her perfectly manicured fingers traced an invisible pattern on the arm of her chair. What he didn't mention was the cost of that world. The compromises, the fear, the isolation. "I'm sorry," I said softly, genuinely moved by the glimpse of vulnerability beneath her polished exterior. She straightened, the moment of openness passing as quickly as it had appeared. "Don't misunderstand me. I made my choice, and I've never regretted it. The Moretti name has given me power, influence, security. But it's not a life I would wish on a young woman with other options." She nudged the envelope closer to me. "Take the money, Sophia. Go back to school. Become a nurse. Help people. Live a life where you don't have to check under your car for explosives or wonder if the new friend you made is actually an informant." Her blunt description of her reality was chilling. I looked from the envelope to her face, searching for signs of manipulation, finding only what appeared to be genuine concern. "And if I don't take it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her expression softened with what looked like genuine regret. "Then I fear you'll learn the hard way what it means to be chosen by a Moretti man." She rose gracefully. "The car that brought you tonight is at your disposal. You needn't say goodbye. In fact, I think it's better if you don't. A clean break is kinder in the long run." She moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. "For what it's worth, I think in another life, under different circumstances, you might have been good for my son." Her smile was sad. "But we don't live in that life, do we?" With that, she was gone, leaving me alone with an envelope containing more money than I'd ever seen at once, and a decision that somehow felt like it would change the course of my life no matter which way I chose. I sat motionless for several long minutes, staring at the envelope. $50,000, freedom from debt, a return to the life I'd planned before my mother's illness had derailed everything. All I had to do was walk away from a man I barely knew, a man whose world was so far removed from mine that any connection between us seemed doomed from the start. It should have been an easy decision. The rational choice was clear, so why did the thought of never seeing Alessio again make my chest ache as if something vital was being torn away? I rose from the chair, the envelope still untouched on the table. Moving to the window, I stared out at the moonlit lake, trying to make sense of the conflicting emotions warring within me. 3 days. I'd known Alessio Moretti for just 3 days, yet somehow he'd managed to upend my carefully constructed world, forcing me to question everything I thought I wanted. The practical part of me, the part that had been paying bills and making sacrifices since I was old enough to understand money, urged me to take Elena's offer. It was generous, more than generous. With $50,000, I could clear my debts, return to nursing school, rebuild the life I'd planned before grief and poverty had ground my dreams to dust. Yet something deeper, more instinctive, rebelled at the idea of being bought off, of having a price tag attached to whatever was developing between Alessio and me. And there was something. I couldn't deny it, couldn't pretend that the electricity that sparked between us whenever we were close was merely my imagination. I was so lost in thought that I didn't hear the door open. It was only when I caught a reflection in the window, a tall figure standing motionless in the doorway, that I realized Alessio had returned. "Your mother was here," I said without turning, my eyes still fixed on the distant horizon where lake met sky. He moved into the room, stopping a few paces behind me. "I know." Of course he did. Very little seemed to escape Alessio's notice. "She made me an interesting offer." His reflection in the glass stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Did she?" I turned to face him then, needing to see his expression clearly. $50,000 to walk away from you. Tonight. No goodbyes, no explanations. I gestured to the envelope still sitting on the table. Enough to pay off my debts and go back to school. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes as they moved from my face to the envelope and back again. "And what did you tell her?" "Nothing," I admitted. She didn't stay long enough for me to respond. He moved closer, stopping just a foot away, his dark eyes searching mine. "Yet you're still here." "I am." "Why?" The question was soft but intense, as if my answer mattered more than he wanted to admit. I swallowed, suddenly finding it difficult to maintain eye contact. "I don't know," I said honestly. By any rational measure, I should take the money and run as far from you and your world as possible." One corner of his mouth lifted in a humorless smile. "Yet you haven't." "Not yet," I agreed. He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away if I wanted to, and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. "My mother means well," he said quietly. "In her own way, she's trying to protect both of us." "From what? From each other?" "From what we might become together." His hand lingered near my face, his thumb brushing lightly against my cheekbone. "She's not wrong about the dangers of my world, Sophia. The life I lead, it's not compatible with normalcy, with safety." "Then why bring me into it at all?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why pursue this, whatever this is, if you know it can only end badly?" His eyes darkened. "Because from the moment you looked at me across that restaurant, something in me recognized something in you. Something I didn't know I was missing until I found it." The raw honesty in his voice stole my breath. This wasn't the smooth charm of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted through manipulation. This was something else entirely, a confession that seemed to surprise him as much as it did me. "That doesn't make sense," I protested weakly. "We're from completely different worlds. I'm nobody, a waitress drowning in debt. You're—" I gestured vaguely at our surroundings, the opulent study that spoke of generations of wealth and power. "I'm a man," he said simply. "Behind the name, the reputation, the power. Just a man who hasn't been seen, truly seen, in longer than I can remember." His hand moved to cup my cheek fully. "Until you." I should have pulled away, should have reached for the envelope and walked out the door, back to the safety of my small life with its modest dreams and manageable expectations. Instead, I found myself leaning into his touch, my eyes closing briefly at the warmth of his palm against my skin. "This is insane," I whispered. "We barely know each other." "Then let me know you," he replied, his voice deepening. "And let me show you who I am. Not the man everyone fears, not the mask I wear for the world. Just me." The sincerity in his eyes was my undoing. Without conscious decision, I closed the small distance between us, my hand coming to rest on his chest where I could feel his heart beating strong and steady beneath expensive fabric. His response was immediate and overwhelming. One arm wrapped around my waist, pulling me firmly against him while his other hand tangled in my hair, tilting my head back as his mouth claimed mine. The kiss was nothing like the hesitant explorations I'd experienced before. This was possession, pure and unrestrained, a man taking what he wanted with absolute certainty that it was his to take. And God help me, I gave myself over to it completely, my arms winding around his neck as I pressed closer, answering his hunger with my own unexpected desire. He tasted of expensive whiskey, and something darker, more dangerous. A flavor I instantly knew I would crave for the rest of my days. When we finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, his eyes had darkened to near black, his usual control visibly fraying at the edges. "Sophia," he murmured, his voice rough with restraint. "If you're going to take my mother's money and walk away, do it now. Because if you stay—" He drew a ragged breath. "If you stay, I won't let you go easily." The warning should have frightened me instead. It sent a thrill of something dangerously close to excitement through my veins. "I don't want your mother's money," I said, the decision crystallizing as I spoke the words. "And I don't want easy." Something primal flashed in his eyes at my response. His hands tightened on me possessively, but before he could speak, a sharp knock on the door forced us apart. "Not now," Alessio growled, his eyes still fixed on mine. The door opened anyway, revealing the same silver-haired man from earlier. "Sir," I wouldn't interrupt if it wasn't urgent. "There's been an incident at the docks, Salvatore's crew. It can't wait." Alessio closed his eyes briefly, frustration evident in the rigid line of his shoulders. When he opened them again, I could see the transformation. The man who had held me with such tender passion, receding behind a mask of cold authority. "I'll be right there," he said, his voice now devoid of the warmth it had held moments ago. The man nodded once and withdrew, leaving the door slightly ajar. Alessio turned back to me, conflict clear in his expression. "Go," I said softly. understanding without being told that whatever required his attention was serious. "Handle your business." He reached for my hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture that was becoming familiar. "This isn't how I wanted tonight to end," he said against my skin. "The night isn't over yet," I replied, surprising myself with my boldness. His eyes darkened again. "Wait for me here. Please. I'll have someone bring you anything you need when I return." He paused, his thumb tracing circles on my wrist. "We'll continue our conversation." The promise in his voice sent heat coursing through me. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. With visible reluctance, he released my hand and moved toward the door, pausing on the threshold to look back at me once more. His gaze so intense it left me breathless. Then he was gone, the sound of his footsteps fading down the corridor. I sank into one of the leather chairs, my heart racing, my lips still tingling from his kiss. What was I doing? Turning down a chance at financial freedom to pursue what, exactly? A relationship with a man whose business dealings were whispered about in fear, whose family operated outside the law, whose world was so fundamentally different from mine that any future between us seemed impossible. My eyes fell on the envelope still sitting on the table. $50,000. Freedom. Safety. The rational choice. Instead, I rose and moved to the window again, staring out at the moonlit grounds of the Moretti estate. In the distance, I could see a group of men moving quickly toward several black SUVs parked in a far corner of the property. Alessio was among them, his commanding presence unmistakable even from a distance. I watched as he issued instructions, his men responding with immediate deference. This was who he was, a man of power, of authority, of danger. A man whose world I was choosing to enter with my eyes wide open. Time passed strangely as I waited. A staff member brought a tray of light refreshments which I barely touched. I browsed the bookshelves, finding comfort in the familiar titles mixed among business texts and historical accounts of Chicago's storied past. At some point, I kicked off the heels that had been pinching my feet all evening, curling up in one of the large leather chairs with a volume of Italian poetry I remembered my grandmother reciting during my childhood. The gala must have ended hours ago, the guests departing in their luxury cars to their luxury homes, unaware that the host's son was dealing with an incident at the docks, rather than bidding them goodbye. I wondered what Elena had told them about my absence, about Alessio's disappearance. Had she expected me to take her money and vanish? What would she say when she discovered I was still here, waiting for her son in his private study? It was well past midnight when the door finally opened. Alessio stood in the entrance, his bow tie undone, his expression guarded as his eyes found me curled in the chair. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us charged with unasked questions and unspoken fears. "You're still here," he finally said, his voice revealing a hint of surprise despite his usual control. I closed the book in my lap, setting it aside. "I said I would be." He moved into the room, his movements betraying a slight stiffness that hadn't been present before. As he came closer, I noticed a dark smudge on the cuff of his pristine white shirt, a stain that looked disturbingly like blood. "Are you hurt?" I asked, rising from the chair, concern overriding everything else. He glanced down at his cuff, his expression hardening momentarily before he shook his head. "It's not mine." The implication hung in the air between us. I should have been horrified, should have run from the room and never looked back. Instead, I found myself asking, "Do you want to talk about it?" His laugh was short and without humor. "No, Sophia. That's the one thing I never want to do with you. Discuss the uglier aspects of my business." He moved to a sidebar, pouring himself a measure of amber liquid that he drank in one swift motion. "You deserve better than that contamination." I approached him slowly, stopping just within reach. "If I'm going to be part of your life, I'll have to accept all of you. Even the parts you'd rather keep hidden." He turned to face me, his expression grave. "Is that what you want? To be part of my life? I'm still here, aren't I?" He set down his glass, his eyes never leaving mine. "Despite my mother's offer, despite what you might have witnessed tonight, despite knowing on some level exactly what kind of man I am." "I don't know what kind of man you are," I corrected softly. "Not fully." but I'd like the chance to find out. Something in his expression shifted, softened. You continue to surprise me, Sophia Parker. Is that a good thing? It's unprecedented, he admitted, reaching out to trace the line of my jaw with his fingertips. I've spent my life anticipating every move, predicting every reaction, but you defy expectation at every turn. I leaned into his touch, drawn to him despite every rational warning screaming in my mind. What happens now? His thumb brushed across my lower lip, his eyes following the movement. Now, I take you home. It's late, and you've had enough of the Moretti family drama for one night. Disappointment flared briefly before I recognized the respect in his restraint. He wasn't dismissing me. He was giving me time to consider, to process, to be certain. And tomorrow? I asked. Tomorrow, he said, his voice deepening. I begin the process of making you mine. Properly. No more chance encounters, no more family interventions. Just you and me, seeing where this leads. The possessiveness in his words should have alarmed me. Instead, it sent a thrill of anticipation down my spine. And if it leads somewhere serious? His expression grew solemn. Then you should know what you're getting into, cara mia. My world is not kind to weakness, to vulnerability. Being with me means accepting protection that will sometimes feel like a cage. It means understanding that there are parts of my business you can never know, questions you can never ask. It means trusting me absolutely, even when circumstances appear damning. That's a lot to ask, I said softly. It is, he agreed, which is why I'm giving you tonight to think about it. Tomorrow, when your head is clear and you're away from all this. He gestured to our opulent surroundings. You can decide if what's between us is worth pursuing, despite the cost. I studied him in the soft lamplight. This complex man who commanded fear and respect in equal measure, who could order violence one moment and treat me with such tender consideration the next. And if I decide it is, worth it, I mean. The smile that curved his lips transformed his severe features, making him look younger, almost boyish. Then, Sophia Parker, I promise you a life beyond anything you've imagined. Not easy, perhaps not always safe, but never boring, never lonely, and never lacking in passion. He drew me closer, his arms encircling my waist as he bent to brush his lips against mine. Not the consuming fire of our earlier kiss, but a gentle promise of what might come. For tonight, though, I'll return you to your apartment like the gentleman my mother raised me to be. True to his word, Alessio escorted me home in his Bentley, his hand holding mine throughout the journey. When we arrived at my rundown building, he walked me to my door despite my protests that it wasn't necessary. Humor me, he said as we reached my apartment. I need to see you safely inside. Professional hazard. I turned to face him at my threshold, suddenly shy despite the intensity of our earlier moments. Thank you for tonight. It was educational. He laughed softly. That's one word for it. His expression grew serious as he reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. You left the envelope, I noticed. I did. Why? I considered my answer carefully. Because whatever is happening between us, I want it to be real. Not a transaction, not an obligation. Just us, figuring it out together. He studied me for a long moment, something like wonder crossing his features. You continue to amaze me, he murmured, before leaning in to place a brief, tender kiss on my lips. Sleep well, cara mia. I'll call you tomorrow. I watched from my window as his car disappeared into the night, my mind replaying the events of the evening. The confrontation with Marco, Elena's warning, the kiss that had changed everything. I should have been terrified, overwhelmed by the implications of involving myself with a man like Alessio Moretti. Instead, I felt strangely calm, as if I'd been moving toward this moment my entire life without realizing it. 6 months later, I stood in front of a different mirror in a different room, hardly recognizing the woman who looked back at me. Gone was the exhausted waitress in a cheap uniform, replaced by someone who moved with confidence in designer clothes, who no longer flinched at price tags or calculated tip percentages to pay bills. My apartment was now a spacious penthouse overlooking the lake, my student debt a distant memory. My nursing studies resumed at Alessio's insistence. "You will finish what you started," he had declared on our third date, brooking no argument. "I want you to have your own identity, your own purpose beyond me." It hadn't all been easy, this transition into Alessio's world. There had been tense dinners with Elena, who had eventually thawed when she realized I wasn't going anywhere. There had been outright hostility from Marco, who still regarded me with barely concealed disdain at family gatherings. There had been nights when Alessio returned late, tight-lipped about where he'd been or what he'd done, and I'd had to learn to stop asking certain questions. But there had also been moments of such profound connection, such raw honesty between us, that they outweighed every difficulty. Alessio, with his guard down, was a different man, passionate, sometimes playful, fiercely protective, and capable of a tenderness that still caught me by surprise. "Ready, Kara?" His voice pulled me from my thoughts as he appeared in the doorway of our bedroom, impeccable as always in a tailored suit. Tonight was another charity gala, this one for a children's hospital where I'd recently started volunteering. "Almost," I replied, fastening my mother's bracelet around my wrist, the only piece of jewelry I'd refused to let him replace with something more expensive. The silver key charm caught the light as I turned to face him. He moved behind me, his arms encircling my waist as he pressed a kiss to the sensitive spot below my ear. "You're beautiful," he murmured. His eyes meeting mine in the mirror, I leaned back against his solid strength, studying our reflection. The powerful man in his perfect suit, the woman who had found her own kind of strength in his world. We made an unlikely pair, the mafia boss and the waitress who had cursed in Italian, yet somehow, against all odds, we fit. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his chin resting on my shoulder. I smiled, covering his hands with mine where they rested on my stomach. That 6 months ago, I was carrying plates and counting tips. And now, he prompted. I turned in his arms, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. Now I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. The tender look in his eyes, a look only I ever got to see, warmed me from within. "No regrets?" he asked, a rare vulnerability in his voice. "None," I said truthfully. "Your world isn't easy, Alessio. It's complicated and sometimes frightening, but it's also passionate and loyal and surprisingly full of love." I rose on tiptoe to press a soft kiss to his lips, and it has you. That makes it worth everything. His arms tightened around me, his kiss deepening with the possessive intensity that still made my heart race. When we broke apart, both slightly breathless, the look in his eyes was one I'd come to recognize. Part wonder, part fierce possession. "Mine," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "Still can't believe you're mine," I smiled, taking his hand and placing it over my heart. "Yours," I agreed, "for as long as you want me." His answering smile, the rare, genuine one that transformed his entire face, lit something warm and bright within me. "Then prepare for forever, cara mia," he said, lacing his fingers through mine, "because I'm never letting you go." As we left the penthouse hand in hand, heading toward another night among Chicago's elite, I reflected on the strange, winding path that had led me here, from a broken plate and an Italian curse, to the arms of a man who ruled his world with iron control, yet looked at me like I was the miracle he'd never dared hope for. Life with Alessio would never be simple. There would always be parts of his business kept carefully separate from me, always be risks that ordinary couples never faced. But there would also be this, his hand in mine, his unwavering protection, his surprisingly tender heart that he shared with no one but me. My mother had always told me that the right path rarely feels easy, that true love asks something of us, challenges us to grow beyond our comfortable boundaries. Walking beside Alessio Moretti, I finally understood what she meant. Our beginning had been unlikely, perhaps even dangerous, but our story was ours alone, written in the language of risk and reward, of passion and protection, of two people who recognized in each other exactly what they'd been missing all along. And that, I decided as Alessio helped me into the waiting car, his dark eyes holding a promise only I could read, was a story worth living, with all its complications, with all its dangers, with all its unexpected joy.